I was a first time leader and I had received a lot of feedback, right? And I was like, okay, I will do this, to please my boss. And I will do this to please my people. And I will do this to save my people from this person who's like really abusive in public meetings, until I realized, one day, oh my God, the kind of grace that I'm expected to give to people, what about that grace for me? Like, where is that grace for me? Hallelujah, right?
Hey guys, welcome to episode number 172 of the Game On Girlfriend podcast. Today, I'm bringing you something a little bit different than I normally do. I know you're shocked. Today, I am bringing you Kalpa Gupta, who is an extraordinary woman who really helps people deal from childhood sexual abuse. Now, the name of her business is Knekxt, and what she really does, she's the CEO and founder of this company that goes out and really helps executives and really successful people mitigate risk and understand how to build trust. And she does that by dealing with childhood trauma, specifically childhood sexual abuse. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you would understand and know why this specific topic is so important to me. But as a business coach, you might be wondering, why are we talking about this? You guys, we have so much that goes on in our heads and in our histories that we are usually not that aware of. We start to create patterns as children based on what happens to us, what happens at us. I like to say sometimes too, and as children, we're powerless in the face of those things. And these moments in our lives, especially as children, can end up shaping what we believe is possible, what we believe we can and cannot do, how the world is. And as Einstein said, we all ask the question, is this a safe place or not, right? Meaning the universe, the world, is this a safe place or not? And that's a fundamental question we're all trying to answer. And if we had traumatic childhoods, the answer is usually no. And then you can imagine you're going out to launch a business or start something new, and you feel like this is not a safe place for you to do that. That can really hold you back in all things that you do in life. So whether or not your childhood seemed to be traumatic, I really invite you to listen to this discussion from the perspective of, how can I strengthen myself? What new risks can I take and know that I'm safe? What do I need to heal? And we talk a lot in this episode about forgiveness, mostly self-forgiveness. How can you drop that so that you are free and light and excited to take on what's next? It's a big episode. I want you to just get a glass of water, make yourself comfortable. If you're working out, good on you. But listen in, pop in those earphones, and let's get to it. Kalpa, welcome to the Game On Girlfriend podcast. Boy, am I happy to have you here today.
Hi, Sarah. I am so thankful today, really, for this divine timing to be able to share all of our stories to serve the people that are listening.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, you're already like one of my favorite people. So what you guys don't know is we've been chatting off camera for a little bit, and Kalpa's story is amazing. But also what she does, I'm going to probably cry in this episode, but what she does is so amazing. And I'm really excited for you guys to listen in. And even if, lots of trigger warnings in this episode, right? Even if you are someone who has never experienced any form of sexual abuse, there's so much to learn, I think, in this episode about what we're going to discuss. There's so much to learn in how we can overcome things, right, Kalpa? And how we can get stronger when things happen. So I'd love for you to just share briefly, why is this what you do? And tell us what you do and why it's what you do.
Sure. So I help sexually abused women and children, particularly my work is focused on women who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, shift their identity from shame, blame, and guilt, really feeling integrated and whole. And really my intention is we are creating a kinder world that many of us didn't have. So yes, I also experienced childhood sexual abuse from early childhood, 3 or 4 years old. That's my early memory, up until like early 20s, and by probably 6 or 7 different people, including my uncle, a cousin, a teacher. I found out my mom is also, she'd also experienced sexual abuse, and she had never shared with anybody until her 60s when I finally came forward. I think the reason I do this work is what you and I we encountered, right? It's unfortunate, but it's not uncommon. Mm-hmm. People go through all kinds of early childhood adversities, and that shapes us. We also need to know that when some of the coping mechanism that we develop, they stop serving us. And I started on this path, Sarah, back to your question, was I felt completely disconnected in my life. And I still remember sitting on the couch one day, like I think it was about 5 years ago, and saying to my husband that I need help. And at the time, I was like exploring therapy, a coach. Long story short, I ended up quitting a job, and I realized that I was carrying a lot of my trauma that I hadn't shared with anybody. I went down that path. I did all the work that I needed to for healing and sharing with people in my life, right? And being very clear, why am I sharing? Right? I think that becomes very important. So that's why I'm here today, to share like my journey and show different possibilities for people that healing is possible.
Yeah. And it does look different for everyone, right? The way that
Yeah.
we heal, the way that we start to use these skills that I think we learn when we develop these coping mechanisms. I really love what you said about the moment when the coping mechanisms no longer work. And I think that's such an important thing for all of us to realize. And you guys, look, I I recognize I'm a business coach as we're having this conversation, right? Like I got it. And, most of the audience knows I experienced sexual abuse as a child as well. And one of the strengths I think that gave me was showing me I could overcome anything, that we have no control over what life hands us, but we always have control over how we respond. And that gets thrown around really easily, I think. But it's quite profound when we actually sit and observe, oh my gosh, look at what we've all been able to manage and cope through. But what happens at that moment? Or if there's someone who's listening and they're like, wow, I never thought of the idea that my coping mechanisms, be they around money, business, sex, intimacy, financial health, physical health, I think, listener says, I think my coping mechanisms might be expiring. How do they know that? Like, what sort of signs does somebody start to experience when the coping mechanisms are tapping out? They're just not serving someone anymore. What do you think they experience, or what have you seen?
I am going back to that moment in time. And I think my thought was, I am tired of fixing myself. So your coping mechanisms are such that, oh, maybe this person, so in my situation, right, I was a first-time leader and I had received a lot of feedback, right? And I was like, okay, I will do this, to please my boss. And I will do this to please my people. And I will do this to save my people from this person who's like really abusive in public meetings. And oh, maybe they are tough and this is how they are, I'll just navigate, tiptoe around them, until I realized, one day, oh my God, the kind of grace that I'm expected to give to people, what about that grace for me? Like, where is that grace for me? Hallelujah, right?
Yes, yeah.
So for me, I remember sitting in the couch and talking to my husband. I had just come back from an international trip from work and after launching like a big project. And I remember a leader at the time, my boss, saying, oh, we are going to move this person in your team, for who I had been advocating for a salary raise for like the last several months. And the narrative was that I can't lead people. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not getting the support I need. And I'm like, why am I tolerating all this? Right. So I started in that moment, started looking for other opportunities, but still something wasn't working. And my husband, I remember sitting there and at one day, like very disappointed, just sad, and like called up, right? Like a whole, and I'm like, I think there's a problem. And I said I needed help. I saw tears in his eyes, like almost our marriage was falling apart. So fast forward from that feeling to few months later, I quit the job and then I hired a coach. I worked through like my therapy, like all kinds of things. And then at some point I eventually shared. So the women that are going through, it is that feeling. Your sexual abuse, sometimes it's repressed. Sometimes we don't remember, but it's the feeling of constantly like tiptoeing around people, like almost living with that scarcity, like really hypervigilance essentially, right? Around everything that's happening, and things are happening to you. I'm not saying you were not victim of anything in any situation, whether it's toxic workplace or whether it's sexual abuse or any other kind of trauma, right? But there is a difference in the victim mindset, right? Which is like, I remember at the time, this thing was of the past. What has that got to do with the situation?
Right.
Right. So that is the feeling that I had. In my case, it was like, I am done fixing. I don't know what to do. Right. Was the feeling, because every which way, which was like, oh, do we working hard, always like giving people grace, that just wasn't working. And this wasn't the vision of life that I had for me.
So if someone's listening and they're like, oh my gosh, okay, I think my coping mechanisms are tapping out. We're looking for a feeling of, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm tired of fixing everything for everyone else. I'm tired of pleasing everyone else. And I'm empty. Is that sort of like Would those kind of be indicators of like, this is not working anymore?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
And then also like burnout. Like I was working,
Yeah.
I remember before leaving the job, I was worked till like 2 a.m. in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then even when I left, it was clear I wasn't needed, but I just wanted to make sure that everything was going well. So I would support, which is like our ethic. Like we sometimes take on too much, right?
Yes. I'm coming from that abusive background, right? Is
Mhm.
this idea that I have to overcompensate. And I don't know, my experience was I have to overcompensate and be so amazing so nobody finds out. It was kind of that feeling of like, or I think there were also days where it's like, there must be something wrong with me. So if I overperform, no one will know that there's something wrong with me. And hence we find ourselves working until 2 a.m. or not getting recognition when we've done something great and thinking, well, I guess that's just the way it is. And I think this is a really important conversation for us to notice where we're tolerating certain things. And I think you actually said that word, to tolerate these situations and just think that, I guess this is what I deserve, or I guess this is as good as it gets, and sort of dropping that idea, like you said, dropping that sort of victim mentality. It can come in kind of almost like sneaky ways when we have been abused or we have felt taken advantage of. It can be hard to kind of pull up that courage and that strength. Have you found that in people that you work with? Are they able to find that center, that source?
Many different ways we are hard on ourselves, just holding on to that dress that fit us like 10 years ago that doesn't fit us anymore, and just hoping for things to be back the same way. So we just we are overcompensating, being hard on ourselves, right? And life gets to be easy. Life is beautiful.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that might be my favorite thing anyone's ever said on the podcast. Life gets to be easy. That is so beautiful. And I think that's true. It's almost like one of the phrases I say a lot, Kalpa, is, you're on the wrong path when you feel like you're pushing water uphill. Like that maybe that's not the right path for you, right? As opposed to working hard or accepting challenges and overcoming them or developing skill sets of support. But that's fun.
Yeah.
Right. When we're really in the flow of things and things are challenging or there's something we have to learn, it's actually kind of fun. I love that you just said life gets. Oh, love it.
Thank you. And yes, life gets to be easy, and I'm thinking right now, like with my husband the other day, he texted me and he said, what are your plans on this day on a recurring basis? And I looked at why he was asking. He just signed up for a dance classes, and me and my husband, dance classes, knowing us, we are not that person, right? First it was like
so
career,
fun.
then children. And so, there's a reward to doing that work, right? And avoiding, yes, of course, with trauma comes also avoidance. Like sometimes we feel like we can do this, overcompensate, and this thing will just go away, or we can just hide it. That in sometimes unfortunately happens, and it takes a toll on you, right? Health wise, mental health, everything, right? And if you do the work, it's possible to take certain small shifts, right? To move in the right direction.
Right. It doesn't mean it'll be super perfect all the time,
Perfect.
but it's a
Yeah.
lot more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know when you're really working with people to sort of help them understand the challenges they've faced and where they stand now, you have something that's called an ACE score. Can you describe what that is to us?
Yeah, so ACEs are the adverse childhood experiences. And this was a study done in the late 90s by Kaiser Permanente and CDC over 17,000 adults. These are white, Caucasian, middle class, college educated, what you would call normal. The narrative was, all the trauma and things can happen in rural families and broken families and poor families, people, different demographics. But when the study was done, what was found is it is very common, right? Basically, there are three categories in the ACEs, your abuse, which can be sexual abuse or physical abuse or, emotional abuse. And then there is all kinds of, family dysfunction like separation or mental illness. So there are 10 categories. People can go and see what their ACEs are. If you have 4 or more ACEs, you have many more times chances of, mental depression and basically suicidal tendencies. The ACEs, when you have this significantly alters your basically brain's wiring in simple terms, like the fight and flight, all that response. And usually in trauma, for example, Sarah, if I am, suffering, let's say my hand gets trapped between the door or something, I scream and I ask for help, right? And then when that help is not coming, right? That's the more common way of asking for that help. You start you're like freezing. You're like, oh, maybe that door will never open. Maybe if I just slowly pull it, but then the door is like so heavy, you can't pull it apart. So your hand is just stuck. So, you develop some coping mechanisms around that. So once you know that what your ACEs are, I encourage people to kind of go back, take a look at those ACEs and see if they had any of those criteria, including sometimes, domestic abuse at home. I didn't know about ACEs until my mid-30s, right?
Wow.
When I
Yeah.
started serving as a volunteer to kids in the foster care system, and I was helping with training and education, I learned about all the ACEs. And I was like, I have at least one, right? Maybe even two. If somebody is also wanting to make a shift and you feel like nothing is possible, know that if you are alive right now, something has gone right in your life.
Oh, that's
You
beautiful.
have something in your but that you can start to make a difference. And when you start reaching out and serving, you will find a path to healing, right?
That's gorgeous. I want a bumper sticker that says, if you're breathing right now, something's gone right in your life. That is so great. Cause I think we forget our brains are so wired. I love, by the way, that you mentioned as we start to heal and look at different things, or as things happen to us, our brain structure actually changes. There are physiological changes, right, in the brain that happen. I think that is so incredibly important for us to understand it. I don't think most of us do, right? We just sort of take it for granted, right? But if we look at like the brain of someone who's incredibly addicted to a substance, for example, or to gambling or sex or food or whatever the addiction is, how different the brain is, right? How the structures start to change and alter. And we all have these different addictions. And by the way, one of the addictions I think we have or can have is an addiction to our identity. And if we're stuck in the identity of everything's horrible, I always attract toxic people, this is never going to get better, if we can stay in there, that in and of itself starts to perpetuate this idea. So I think being able to pull it out into the ACEs, that is so cool, because now you have something outside of yourself almost to sort of look at and study that's not as emotionally charged, right? It might be hard to look at the instances, but I just think that is so cool to look at it that way and sort of number it and keep track of it. Have you found that that really helps people to do that?
It helped me. I mean, I've shared it with my husband. It has helped him. I have shared it in conferences or like more in events, either virtual or forums with executives for hundreds of people, right? And I can tell you, when I've done the polling, at least half the people have or they know somebody who's experienced childhood sexual abuse. Some forums, it's as high as 70 and 80. And the overwhelming feedback that I've got is like, oh my God, I didn't know, or I didn't talk about, like, we don't talk about these things, right? And these things are so real. It's almost like hidden endemic that's happening, and it's just we don't talk about it. For me, Sarah, I don't know the actual numbers, who it's helped or not, but the feedback that I get really helpful. At least the one-on-one comments that I get, many a times people are still stuck in that shame and blame, or more shame, I would say, where they can't forgive themselves, right? So they don't talk about it. But for me, what I find is knowledge is the first part to even becoming aware, right? What you do with that is the choice. That's where the choice lies. And sometimes that choice people take years to do. Sometimes it's just that shift, right? You and I, what's in our control is to share in a way that, hopefully some people see the possibility, right? That this can maybe save their lives.
Yeah. I think it can. And I really think it's important what you just said about the shame piece. They can't forgive themselves. And I think what's so important for us to understand when we're looking at childhood wounds, no matter what they are, but I know especially around sexual, there's so much shame, but to remember that as a child, you were completely powerless. There was nothing you could do, honestly. And we look back and we think, I could have clobbered him in the face. I could have done that. Like, I think we look back and we're like, I could have. But in those young, tender years, you really don't, there's nowhere to go. In that moment, you're so powerless. And I think understanding the truth of that, and I think actually documenting the ACEs can support that, because again, it pulls it away from you a little bit and you can see it, but then also to understand that as a child, you were completely powerless. And one of the things I do with my clients when they're upset about how they've spent money, or they're upset about the way they approach their business, or they were abused and they're still mad at themselves, which is just so common, is I'll say, can you please go find a picture of yourself when you were 4 or 5 and this was happening, and scream at her the way that you're screaming at yourself right now. And they go, oh my gosh. It's like, or go out in the world and see a 4 or 5-year-old and expect that child to act with your adult brain. It's just not possible. And I think that is such an important piece to healing in our understanding of what actually happened. and being able to release it because you were so powerless.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember the moment, like I was lying next to my son, and it's not until my son was born actually that I started realizing the extent of God, what had happened, right? Like because that's triggering for many parents. Like the path, I think two times people are most triggered is on your path to motherhood, right? And then once they become teenagers, because then they experience their sexuality. So for me, it was like I looked at my 3-year-old, he was lying next to me, and I'm like, God, if something were to happen to this child, would it be his fault? Would I keep quiet? Would I just not go and share? Like, why carry the shame? And what is going to be the most mother-like thing that I can do to make sure that my child, I can't control that it doesn't happen, but at least do in my best part that, he gets that protection, right? Is actually talk about it. And then also that was the moment when it was like, for the first time, God, that was not my fault. So for anyone, going through that, I think it's just that I always say, be to my, networks and clients, like have grace for yourself, because I think that's what we forget. Like we want to be this best person to everybody and compensate for everything, because that's what we learned as a child. Like the people that we trusted, we believed at some point if we shared that story, we wouldn't be believed. And in many cases, maybe there are people who actually tried sharing the stories and they weren't believed. So how do I then realize the extent of what happened, and I will always detach ourselves, like our identity, from that. I am a product person, so I always say, look at your life as a problem that you're solving, right? And detach. It's almost like be on that stage and watch something is happening, and then you'll find so many different other alternative ways of looking at that situation versus personalizing, based on our ego, right? That, oh, this must be me, or I am the only one who can solve this problem. Maybe some problems are not worth solving. You just need the like the oxygen mask first for yourself.
Yeah, it really is part of that. That's so cool. So I have two more questions for you, I think, unless we keep talking about all the amazing gooey goodness here. But for someone who is ready to integrate themselves and be the best version of themselves, and they're listening to this and they're feeling stuck, what would be the first piece of advice you would give them? Or what's one thing you hope they take away from this conversation that they could actually do?
First and foremost, forgiveness. Like, write as much as you can. And sometimes forgiveness is easier said than done, right? One of my clients equated it to a bag of like, shopping bags. Like you're going from store to store to store and you're carrying, and then you come home in the end. And when you leave the bag, the feeling that you get, like, oh. Right?
Yeah.
Right? And I give another example, like, you have a car, like let's say your head gets hit against the door. Do you go and keep hitting your head again and again, telling yourself that, oh, it hurt me now, I'm so stupid, how could I not see? Do you do that? Then why? Hopefully these examples give you something to think about, like that, how hard, like we worry about other people, but we are being so hard on ourselves in this moment. Remember, we are so powerful, like you are alive. So that's number one advice. And number two, please reach out to somebody, whether it's a coach, like, Sarah does some amazing things with, money, right? And healing. I will coach people. You can go to a therapist if you need to process your past. There are just so many ways, or confide into somebody, but know that only you have a choice of who you want to share and when you want to share and why, right? Nobody gets to dictate that to you, right? It's your choice. You are adult. You have a choice in choosing what the path you want. Whenever the timing is right, I think those are the two things I would say, get started.
And then once somebody starts this journey, what do you see as the possibilities for people who've really worked through this and started to heal?
Like I shared a little bit about, the possibilities, like you're a great example. Like just think about way you're showing up and, showing people the possibilities. I'm a possibility here. Like, here I was sitting on that couch, like waiting, like thinking, like blaming my parents, why they chose this man. Like, I wasn't sure if I love him, or I wasn't sure, like, even in spite of being a mom, if I wanted to spend the time, or this job, this boss, this company wasn't good, the situation wasn't good, this person did it to me. To here showing up and going, you know what, I was on a wrong path. I was on a wrong path and I was being hard on me. I wasn't asking. And so there's separating, it doesn't absolve other people of what they did. They're all broken. People are going about, hurt people, hurt others. So it is possible, right? One of my clients, as I'm working, like they are saying, hey, Kalpa, just working, being with myself and giving my body what it needs last month just makes me feel so light. So how often are we just doing those simple things? Like for us, like, are we noticing our hunger? Are we noticing our body needs a rest? Like, are we noticing that we need a hug in the moment, right? So all life gets to be easy. I hope people, that are listening, remember that nature has seasons. Yes, you might be feeling like you are in the winter, but spring is coming. And literally, I think I feel spring is coming.
I think this is almost like a childlike, not childish, but childlike experience we can all have, that what we're feeling right now, that's the way we're going to feel forever. It's never going to get better. It's never going to get worse. It's always going to be like that. And that is just absolutely not factual. I don't even know how else to say it. It's not even that it's not true. It's not factual. Like that is just inaccurate. And this idea that as we start to heal, or even once we've healed, there still might be more work to be done. There still might be other things that can happen, but the seasons continue to change. We continue to develop, emotions continue to develop, and experiences tend to get processed over time in different ways. And that each time we take a step forward, it matters, and it creates the possibility of a new future each time. I love it. I love it.
It does. And I love what you said so beautifully. Like, we need to learn from our children, like not to have judgments for our emotions. Emotions are just emotions. They are like an energy in motion, So feel it and see in the next 30 seconds, take an action, move in body, or see like what that situation is telling you. Usually it goes back to like something in your childhood, like, you didn't feel heard or seen or understood, right? And usually like it has nothing to do with the other person, at least as an adult, right?
Yeah.
But we feel those
sure.
feelings. So there's the patterns are very deep. So the more we, stop judging ourselves, if we just remember that there's that inner child that needs something in the moment, right? That vitality, that love, feeling love, that, joy, we listen to that, right? It is possible to get there, because half the time, we've made up all these stories about ourselves and our life, which are not true.
Agreed. Yeah. And then we carry them on and put them on other people in other circumstances as we go. So it's just so powerful to release that. I love the grocery bag analogy there, because once you drop it and you let it go, it does become easier to navigate your own life because you're not carrying all that extra stuff. Kalpa, thank you so much for being with us today. This has just been such a joy. I think this is such an important topic. And for those of you listening or watching, I really hope you take this to heart. We all have things to heal. Like I said earlier, it doesn't have to just be sexual abuse. There's so many things that happened to us as children where we started to take on certain personas, or we started to limit what we thought was possible for us based on those circumstances. And Kalpa is someone who's helping people let that go. Kalpa, if people loved hearing from you today, where can they find out more about you and your work?
Sure. So they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Kalpa Gupta. So that's my full name, Kalpashree, Gupta, Gupta. Or they can follow me. I'm on active also on TikTok. So they can find with my company name, Knekxt, which is KNEKXT.com. And that's my website also, where if they want to work with me, they can find more information on Knekxt.com.
Kalpa, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think this is going to be really helpful.
Thank you, Sarah, for all that you do and serving the people who've had similar experiences. Thank you.